In 500 AD, some Danish soldiers shot a troll off a cliff. After the troll falls off the cliff, Hrothgar, the Danish king, notices Grendel, the troll's son, hiding by the cliff, but he chooses to spare him. Now that the Danish are gone and he has been spared, Grendel goes to the foot of the cliff to check on his father. When he notices his father is severely injured, he grabs a sword and cuts his head off. Decades later, Grendel, who had decided to remain at the foot of the cliff and live like a troll, growls in remembrance of his father's death. Meanwhile, a priest in the Danish land performs a ritual for some Danish soldiers before leading them into a building where they can rest. While all this is happening, Grendel is hiding in a field, watching them like an animal watching its prey. After hours of watching during the day, Grendel knocks out a guard and sneaks up on the Danish soldiers resting in the building. The next morning, Hrothgar, the Danish king, walks into the building to inspect the massacre Grendel had left behind. On the other hand, Beowulf, an injured soldier, drags himself towards the shores of the Geats. At the shore, he sees a fisherman, introduces himself, and asks the fisherman if another soldier had gotten to the shore before him. Although the fisherman says no, Beowulf stays by the shore and allows the fisherman to offer him dinner. Many years go by, and Beowulf blends in with the Geats so well that he eventually becomes a prominent nobleman respected enough to speak before the Geat king in a meeting. During his speech in the meeting, Beowulf proposes a plan to lead a fleet into the land of the Danishes and help the Danish king, who is apparently an old friend of his, to defeat the deadly troll disturbing the Danish lands. After the king agrees to his proposal, Beowulf and his fleet embark on the journey the following day. At the Danish land, while Hrothgar calls out to Grendel, whom he refers to as a troll, to face him, Grendel sneaks up on the guard to murder him. And Hrothgar, who had heard the lifeless guard fall, turns around only to find a beast-like human running away. The following day, while the Danes and Hrothgar mourn the death of the guard, Hrothgar's wife notices that Hrothgar is at his wit's end, so she gives him an awakening slap to reset his brain. Even though the awakening slap effect has worn off, Hrothgar watches the rest of the villagers perform burial rites for the guard, and while he watches them, a random priest walks up to him to preach about Christianity. Instead of engaging in religious conversations with the priest, Hrothgar asks the priest what he knows about trolls. When the priest circles the conversation back to Christianity, Hrothgar mocks him for his beliefs. This mockery angers the priest, so he demands Hrothgar take him to the troll to test the Almighty's power. But mid-demand, the priest suddenly slumps. At another part of the Danish land, Hrothgar's wife seeks a witch's advice over her husband's sanity. But unfortunately for her, Selma, the witch who seems to have a pending problem with her, gives her a sarcastic response. About the same time, Beowulf and his fleet arrive at the Danish shore. At the shore, Beowulf introduces himself to a Danish soldier, and after claiming that they have come as friends of Hrothgar, the Danish king, the soldier welcomes him and his men into the land. While the soldier leads the visitors to the king, Selma, the Danish witch, catches Beowulf's eye, but when he asks the soldier who she is, the soldier tells him that she's a witch who only sees people's deaths. Soon enough, Hrothgar, who had become a full-blown drunkard, runs out of his hut to welcome his old friend. After exchanging welcomes and greetings, Hrothgar offers to prepare a feast to celebrate the arrival of his visitors. During the feast, while the queen makes a toast on behalf of her drunken king, Grendel approaches the village, growling like the troll the Danishes often refer to him as. After the feast, Grendel walks in on the priest praying, but instead of harming him, he mockingly mimics the priest before leaving to check if the Danes and their guests are asleep. Inside the soldiers' quarters, Beowulf and his men hear scuffling on the other end of the door, so they open the door, ready to attack, but when they get outside, they see nobody. The following morning, Hrothgar and Beowulf approach the priest to ask where he spent the night. In response, the priest yaps about Christians being protected from harm. But when he leaves, Hrothgar and the other men, who joined the conversation, convince themselves that the priest survived because of a lucky coincidence. Later that day, while the priest is forcefully baptizing the Danishes, Beowulf, who had just come back from a fruitless search for Grendel, approaches Hrothgar. And after he meets with Hrothgar, Beowulf visits Selma to woo her, but Selma sarcastically turns down his advances. Regardless of being turned down, Beowulf follows Selma around, and when Selma finally warms up to him, she warns him about getting involved in Danish's business. Back at the Danish's village, Beowulf, who had held on to Selma's warning, asks Hrothgar if he has done anything to provoke the troll. At first, Hrothgar barely gives him a tangible response, but when Beowulf insists he tells the truth, Hrothgar accuses him of listening to Selma and her crazy talk. Fast forward to midnight, when Beowulf and his men hear disturbing sounds outside the soldiers' quarters. But just like the previous night, when they burst out, they see no one outside. The following day, Beowulf visits Selma, and after her usual sarcastic remarks, she takes him to her shrine to read how he dies. While Selma performs a ritual to read his death, Beowulf hears a scuffle outside and runs out to check it. Outside, he sees Grendel fleeing, so he mounts his horse to go after him. When Beowulf dismounts his horse to get closer to Grendel, Grendel growls and refuses to attack him, despite his attempts to convince Grendel to fight. Feeling confused at Grendel's refusal to attack him, Beowulf looks at Selma, who had followed him, for an explanation, and Selma responds that Grendel refuses to attack because he only attacks people who offend him first. The following morning, right after Hrothgar tells Beowulf about his declining health condition, Beowulf asks Hrothgar about what he had done to anger the troll again. Just like last time, Hrothgar gets offended by Beowulf's question and circles the conversation back to his declining health issues. After the conversation about his health, Hrothgar reluctantly allows the priest to baptize him at the waterfall as a last resort to cure his illnesses. While this is going on, Beowulf breaks up a fight between some children and a disabled Christian brother, so after the children scramble, the disabled brother promises to take Beowulf to Grendel's cave. True to his word, the disabled brother takes Beowulf alongside his men to a cliff and instructs them to climb down to see the troll's home. But when climbing down doesn't seem possible, Beowulf and his men decide to return home by boat. So while Beowulf and his men are paddling the boat, a sea hag tries to drag one of them into the water, but the others manage to pull him back up. The next morning, Beowulf sees the disabled brother lying lifelessly on the ground, and the sight of the poor man getting murdered by the troll just for showing them his hiding spot angers him. Channeling his anger into revenge, he leads his men into Grendel's cave to take him out, but when they get there, they realize Grendel has fled. Regardless, Beowulf and the soldiers inspect the cave. While they inspect the cave, one of his men sees Grendel's father's skull and shatters it with his sword. After realizing that Grendel must have fled because he knew they were coming, Beowulf goes to Selma's hut to accuse her of warning Grendel before their arrival. But when Selma responds with her usual sarcastic remarks, Beowulf ties her up and drags her to the fields. In the field, Beowulf tries to force Selma to show him where Grendel is hiding, but when Selma refuses to disclose Grendel's location, Beowulf sets her free regardless of his annoyance, and tells her to find her way home out of spite. However, Grendel returns to his cave to see his father's skull crushed on the ground. In an act of vengeance, Grendel infiltrates the Danish land and barges into the soldiers' lodge. Regardless of being outnumbered, Grendel fights off a bunch of Beowulf's men, and when he finally locates the one who destroyed his father's skull, he murders him. After murdering the man, Grendel tries to flee, but when Beowulf notices he's trying to escape, he follows him to the roof and tries to tie him down. Even though Beowulf manages to tie one of his hands down, Grendel jumps out of the roof, only for him to get stuck midair. Realizing that he's stuck, Grendel grabs a spear and cuts off his arm to escape from the Danishes. After escaping the Danes, Grendel returns to the ocean in front of his cave and allows the sea hag to drag him away. While the villagers prepare to bury the dead soldier, Hrothgar shows up to taunt Beowulf about seeing firsthand how it feels to lose a soldier to the troll. But instead of responding to Hrothgar's taunts, Beowulf points out that since Grendel was only interested in murdering the person who destroyed his father's skull, it means that he isn't the type of troll to murder random people without being provoked. Realizing that he's been caught in his lie, Hrothgar finally admits that Grendel is seeking revenge on the Danish because he murdered his father decades ago. Later that day, the Danes throw a feast to celebrate their victory over the troll. After the feast, Beowulf visits Selma, and during the visit, Beowulf realizes that Selma is mourning Grendel. When he points this out, Selma tells him the story of how Grendel had found her house and forced himself on her. She adds that after their first encounter, although Grendel never forced himself on her again, he kept coming back to protect her from the barbaric Danishes, who occasionally visited to force themselves on her. On the other hand, the sea hag comes out of the ocean with a mission to retrieve Grendel's arm. A few steps into her mission, she murders her first victim, who turned out to be the Christian priest, before walking towards the soldiers' quarters. In the soldiers' quarters, the sea hag grabs Grendel's arm and attacks anyone who tries to get in her way. The next day, Beowulf and the other men trace the sea hag to the front of Grendel's cave, where they see a soldier's head on a spike. Regardless of the sea hag's warning sign, Beowulf and his men trail the sea hag into Grendel's cave. In the cave, Beowulf orders his men to stay behind while he searches deeper for the sea hag alone. And after following the water waves, he ends up at another cave. In this cave, he sees Grendel's lifeless body, and while he inspects it, the sea hag tries to attack, but he slashes its neck. Despite being cut, the sea hag picks Beowulf up and tosses him around before putting him in a chokehold. Luckily for Beowulf, he manages to grab a stone, hit the sea hag, and escape her grip. After escaping, he sees a pile of weapons, so he grabs a sword and uses it to strike the sea hag down. But as soon as he strikes it down, a little boy pops out of nowhere with a sword. After taking a good look at the boy, Beowulf pieces together that the boy must be the son of Selma and Grendel. The next day, after the Danishes perform their burial rites for the dead soldier, Beowulf returns to Selma's house to warn her that her son will be murdered if Hrothgar figures out that he is Grendel's child. However, instead of being thankful for his warning, Selma points out that if he truly cared for her son, he wouldn't have murdered his father. Selma's words awaken some sort of guilt in Beowulf's heart. So ease this guilt, he lays Grendel to rest properly before hopping back on a ship with his men to return to Geat. Despite being unsure of why Grendel is attacking the Danishes, Beowulf helps Grendel die, only for him to learn a few days later that Grendel had a son with Selma. What do you predict will become Grendel's son? Do you think he will seek revenge for his father just like Grendel did for his own father, or do you think he would continue hiding from the Danes for the rest of his life? Tell us your predictions in the comments. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more content. Until next time, guys. Peace out.